ready to go!
You're listening to By Land and by Sea, powered by the Maritime Professor. Today we're talking about ports, policy, and the people who keep cargo moving. And I'm joined by someone who knows this world from the inside and out. Former FMC Commissioner Carl Bentzel, now Executive Director of the National Association of Waterfront Employers. You're not going to want to miss this conversation. Hi, welcome back to By Land and by Sea, an attorney breaking down the week in supply chain, presented by the Maritime Professor, me. I'm Lauren Began, founder of the Maritime Professor, former FMC International Affairs attorney, and founder of Squall Strategies. By Land and by Sea is your go-to resource for navigating the regulatory side of global ocean shipping. And me? I'm your favorite maritime attorney. I'm here to walk you through both ocean transport and surface transport topics in the wild world of supply chain. As always, the guidance here is general and for educational purposes only. It should not be construed to be legal advice, and there's no attorney-client privilege created by this video or this podcast. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. This is plain language maritime, created so that anybody, not just lawyers or industry insiders, can understand what's happening in the world of shipping. Let's dive into this week's episode because, as you know, ocean shipping moves the world. All right, well, before we get into today's interview, I do want to cover two quick little updates. The first one being just-in-time learning, Section 301 port vessel fees. We hosted another just-in-time learning event this week. This one was on the new USTR Section 301 port and vessel fees. Did you miss it? Don't worry, it's now available on demand in our just-in-time learning series that's available at the maritimeprofessor.com. These sessions are designed to give you plain language, practical explanations of fast-moving maritime policies, exactly when you need them. So if you're wondering what these new fees mean for shippers, carriers, or even your business, head over and catch the replay. Everything you need to know in 30 minutes or less. And one more thing I want to mention on the Section 301. So here's the latest wrinkle. China now seems to be responding, perhaps maybe even retaliating. So just this week, Beijing revised its international maritime transportation regulations to authorize countermeasures against any country, like the U.S. was kind of the implication here, that imposes what they call discriminatory bans or restrictions on Chinese vessels, operators, or crew. In plain terms, China now has a legal framework to push back on the U.S. Section 301 fees with its own restrictions, is what this seems like. It kind of creates this real tit-for-tat environment in maritime policy. So if you're wondering what these fees mean, not only for you, U.S. importers, anybody in the supply chain, also for the global trade dynamic, this just-in-time training series is one that you're going to want to keep a close eye on, perhaps even take. But this USTR Section 301 tariffs, or port fees, I should say, go into effect October 14th. So we're just a few weeks away. You're going to want to pay attention to this. The second thing that I want to bring up before we get to our guest is the FMC and that appellate court ruling that I wasn't able to talk about last week. I had been traveling. We had a major court ruling last week. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit reviewed the FMC's final rule on detention demurrage. We talked about this quite a bit in the spring. This is on the detention demurrage billing rule. While most of the rule still stands, that's the takeaway here. Most of the rule still stands. The rule that the FMC implemented into its regulations and became the regulation that now dictates and directs how detention and demurrage billing happens, most of it still stands. The only thing the court did here, and again, this is not legal advice, this is just general education, check to see how it applies to you with your attorney. The only thing the court did here was that they set aside Section 541.4, which defined who could be billed. So this is where we get into that motor carrier conversation. That's what the whole thing was kind of about. Section 541.4, it was the section limiting invoices on who it could be sent to, where it could only be sent to the contracting party, the shipper or the NVOCC, or the consignee, but not both and nobody else. That's what it said. That's what Section 541.4 said. The court has struck that section. On its face, that seemed logical, right? The truckers were often getting giant invoices, even though they oftentimes maybe, weren't the contractual counterparty. The FMC's intent was to protect them, right? That's why they had this Section 541.4. That's what they were kind of talking about. But look, here's the nuance. The court didn't say truckers should always pay. They didn't even say truckers should never pay. Instead, the court basically said the FMC didn't, that's kind of how I'm taking it, right? The court kind of said the FMC didn't totally do its homework in explaining why it limited who could be billed. And I shouldn't say it didn't do its homework. It said it didn't make a strong enough argument. The FMC didn't make a strong enough argument on why it limited who could be billed. The World Shipping Council argued that sometimes carriers contract directly with motor carriers, the truckers. In those cases, the trucker may actually be the best party to receive and dispute the invoice. That was the argument from the World Shipping Council. The court agreed the FMC hadn't quite explained that tension, found the rule arbitrary on this point, and severed Section 541.4. This is why they took Section 541.4 out. So the why here isn't about rejecting FMC's authority, it's about rejecting the agency's explanation of why they were limiting it and taking away the motor carrier piece. So what are the big takeaways here? Again, not legal advice, just general education and talk and discussion. Motor carriers, you may see more invoices again, especially if you're contracting party. The FMC's bright line protection for truckers it feels like effectively gone here. Shippers and NVOCCs expect more of the responsibility to shift back to you as the contractual counterparty, perhaps, but we're also going to see motor carriers as part of this. Basically, this is taking away the who it can be billed to, the billed party, as the rule defines. And it just says that part's gone. The rest of the rule still stands, right? The rest of the rule, the incentive principle, the required invoice elements, all of those other things still stand, but the clarity on who pays got a little murkier. I expect we'll probably see some sort of response from the FMC. As you probably know, the U.S. government is shut down right now, which also means the FMC is for the most part shut down. Don't consider this a there are no rules day. Consider this a long extended weekend where the FMC is just not in their seats. The political appointees, I believe, are still working, but the actual agency, all the staff is not under this government shutdown, essentially. So that's what I want to say about that. It's the most of the rule, the takeaway here, the most of the rule still stands. It's just that the court severed Section 541.4, took that away, and that was the who the invoices could be billed to. All right. Well, speaking about the FMC, my guest today knows that agency inside and out. He's been a guest on the show before. He's now bringing his experience into his new role leading the National Association of Waterfront Employers. So let's jump into my conversation with former commissioner, now president of NAWI, Carl Bentzel. Leads an organization that touches the very heart of how U.S. ports work. The National Association of Waterfront Employees, NAWI, represents America's marine terminal operators and stevedores. These are the companies responsible for moving cargo on and off ships, keeping containers flowing through ports, and providing thousands of waterfront jobs in coastal communities. And at a time when U.S. ports face pressure to modernize, stay competitive globally, and adapt to new challenges, NAWI is right at the center of those conversations. Leading NAWI now is someone you'll recognize from his time at the Federal Maritime Commission. Carl Bentzel was appointed FMC Commissioner in 2019 and served through 2024, helping the agency navigate the pandemic-era supply chain crisis. Before that, he spent more than a decade on Capitol Hill with both the House Merchant Marine and Fisheries Committee and the Senate Commerce Committee, working on major maritime laws like the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 1998, OSRA number 1, and the Maritime Transportation Security Act after 9/11. And at the FMC, he spearheaded the Maritime Transportation Data Initiative, or MTDI, to improve supply chain data transparency. Now Carl is bringing all of that experience into his new role as Executive Director of NAWI. And before we dive in, a big thank you to NAWI for supporting today's episode of By Land and By Sea. So Carl, welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show.
Hello, Lauren. It's great to see you again. It's always been a pleasure to work with you on issues in Washington, D.C. and talking about them on your podcast. So I enjoy it.
Well, thanks so much for being back here with us. We always enjoy the conversation. So before we get started, let's start with the basics, right? I always like to make sure that our listeners are all on the same page. So for those who may not know NAWI, who are your members? What do they do? Why are waterfront employers so essential to the supply chain? Kind of take us through the organization.
Sure. Our organization is a really important industry. I think we're probably undervalued and misappreciated, but we're vitally important to the economic stability of our nation and our welfare. We're the people that work and man and operate terminals at ports. So the Port Authority is for the most part, while there are ports that operate, a landlord, and we have terminals with long-term leases to operate and man the facilities and transfer cargo into the interior. So our members handle over 90% of our containerized cargoes that come into the country. So the nation's supply chain, essentially. Probably over a majority of the break bulk cargo that comes in. So some of the larger commodities and almost all of the passengers that go out on cruise ships are staffed by our terminals. So really a critically important industry to our nation. During the pandemic, we were working on overdrive, but if we hadn't been working, it's my view that the economy would have come to a standstill. So a very important industry, sometimes out of the limelight because it's refined to the big port complexes through the United States. We work closely with our port authorities and with trucking lines, trucking companies, and railroads, and BCOs, and of course our customers, the steamship lines.
That's right. You know, one thing that I think people don't necessarily understand about ports is there really are kind of two different kinds of ports in one regard: operating ports and landlord ports. And so, right, when you talk about the terminals, that's usually when you're talking about the landlord ports, where it might be the city or the state who owns the port itself. But then it's the terminal who is operating and who's moving the goods actually, and actually the tenant at that port.
Yeah, no, it's people will sort of amalgamate them. For the most part, most of the terminal operations are managed by private sector companies. Now he also represents the operating ports. So the ports of Georgia Ports Authority, Houston, Virginia, we proudly represent their interests. So we try to focus on operational issues related to any movement of cargo through ports. And the port authorities that are not operating ports, we work closely with because they're working on making sure the channels are deep enough and the surrounding infrastructure is adequate. But we're on the business of moving cargo through our ports as a private sector entity or an operating port for the most part. And so we have purely independent terminals owned in the United States. We have steamship line companies that have terminal operations, and we have operating port authorities in our association. We also represent the operating associations that manage the contracts, the employment contracts, and work on safety issues through our sister association, the National Maritime Safety Association. So we pretty much cover anything that has to do with how you move cargo through ports.
That's great. What a fantastic association. So you yourself, you've been a regulator, obviously working at the FMC, you've been a Capitol Hill staffer, and now you're stepping back into an advocacy role. So what made you want to lead NAWI at this moment? Why was this the time, and why did NAWI bring you in? Why was this the next step for you?
Yeah. Well, I had you missed one step in the lead up. Actually, after I left Capitol Hill, I became an advocate, private sector advocate, a lobbyist, and represented NAWI as their person on Capitol Hill for a number of years before I went back to the Federal Maritime Commission.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So I was very familiar with what they were doing and working on. I really knew the value of the industry. I truly believe that they're undervalued. And so I saw this as a great opportunity to take advantage after one tenure as a commissioner at the FMC of the pandemic, rising acknowledgement of the importance of maritime shipping as an economic driver in our nation, and thought that there was opportunity for growth and expansion, and I'd like to position this association as the preeminent voice on maritime policy in Washington.
You know, and that's such an important point, saying that prior to the pandemic, we really didn't have like society understanding. I mean, certainly that's the biggest thing, right? People don't understand that 90% of everything moves by ocean transit, right? That's everything we touch, eat, consume, everything around you. But during the pandemic itself, actually, maritime workforce wasn't even included as the essential employee listing. That was quickly corrected, but not fast enough for how essential maritime workforce and the maritime system was to how we were getting our PPE.
The U.S. government passed legislation to help the transit and aviation industries during the pandemic that included $120 billion to pay people who essentially were out of business during the pandemic. And so they went home for 2 years. And that was because we couldn't do air travel and we couldn't go to work and we were working from home. At that same time, the industry, maritime industry, was at all-time levels of cargo movement, and so it really was one of these examples of what truly is essential. And so the fact that was at that same in that same legislation, I think they gave $4 million to the Maritime Administration for certain functions, but the maritime industry was neglected, and in fact drove the economic stability of the nation by delivering all of that cargo. And I do want to make the point that this is not just my members, but it's the workforce, the IALA and the ILWU, the railroad workers that did the intermodal railroad trains, the truckers, the warehousing companies that took in cargo. So we all worked through the pandemic every day. And it was hard. So it is a critically important industry. I can't emphasize enough. While I was at the FMC as a commissioner, I was having CEOs come in and tell me that they were losing 15 to 20% of their business opportunity because they couldn't get commodities and things that they needed, products, manufactured goods that were necessary for production of their products. And so I learned firsthand how essential the cargo movement system is to our nation, and it gave me an appreciation of what the terminal industry did, and that is really what led me into going over to NAUI. And I had a sixth sense that being in the government may be difficult this term with this administration. And so I'm really happy to be where I am.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and excuse me, like you said, you were a commissioner during these extraordinary times at the at the FMC during the pandemic, during this heightened cargo congestion, right? I mean, it was the people, we weren't sure which way it was going to go, but the people were actually online shopping. They were buying larger, bulkier items, right? We had a lot of couches, we had a lot of furniture, we had, rugs and desks and tables and everything, right? It's the same 20-foot or 40-foot box that ships all of this. And so the larger the item, the more pressed some of that congestion can become. We had OSRA 22 come about while you were at the FMC. So what are some of the lessons that you're carrying forward from your time at the FMC into now your role at NAUI?
So, I think transportation as a component of the landed cost of a product is very small. If you have a container of Levi's jeans that you're selling for $100 a pair, you can get a lot of Levi's jeans in that container, and you can retail them at far more than the $4,000 price of the transport. You might not even be able to quantify how much that costs. But congestion or cessation of service or delays in that is critically connected to the overall price of the product and getting vital commodities. And I remember having to give calls to port authorities, terminal authorities, shipping lines about getting respirators in because they were a lower value commodity product vis-a-vis and that's healthcare products generally, certain retail goods. So when the steamship lines were negotiating their contracts, they were trying to address their best contracts, which wasn't always in the best interest of the nation. And so I think the lesson that I learned is we're so important to the nation that we need to be maintained to avoid those situations where we can critically impact the welfare of the United States by not being able to provide the services that the nation relies on.
Well, and I think that that's also a testament to kind of the linchpin nature of the ports, right? They are so essential to everything. They are the connector between the ports that are the goods that are coming from abroad and getting to the American people, and vice versa. If we have something to sell, this is how it goes out to market. So, the ports and the terminals and that piece, right? I mean, that's kind of what the whole podcast By Land and by Sea is all about, is this connection between the surface transportation and the ocean transportation, and how critically important it is that everybody understands the value and the importance of both.
It's been that way since the Ideal X left a terminal, and I think it was 1958 in Newark, New Jersey, and delivered cargo on an old oil tanker and established containerization, intermodalization. I think it may have even been more important than the internet because it opened the door for the importation of and the outsourcing of all sorts of commodities and movements that we benefit now as consumers. You can sit at your computer and go on Amazon and order as much as you want to order and hit as many buttons and get as responsive a service on the communications side of the equation. But ultimately, if that cargo is not delivered to your door, it's irrelevant. And so really, that is the underpinning of our economic boom internationally, and it was developed in the United States. It was U.S. shipping companies that developed intermodalism. I think Sealand Service was the company that established the first intermodal container shipping services. American President Lines, now part of CMA, CGM, developed double-stack rail services to facilitate a 200% better system of moving intermodal cargo into the interiors. Right now, at any particular day, more than 50% of the cargo going through the 11 terminals in LA Long Beach goes on either on dock rail that my members pay for, or on intermodal rail services to Chicago, Dallas, points in the interior, Memphis, and that's the same with all other U.S. ports and terminals. So it's a critically important technology that seems so simple, yet has changed really the fabric of the world's economy.
So I think that that's a really important point there. When you were talking about the intermodalism, right? That's the boxes that we're talking about. That's where you have a change from where it was break bulk or just basically loose goods that you're kind of trying to pack together, to more of a systematic. We have the 20-foot equivalent unit. This is the actual box that goes on the ship, or the 40-foot equivalent unit. And often, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, that's how we kind of say how big a vessel is. It's 10,000 TEUs, and that's what they're talking about, is 10,000 of those 20-foot equivalent boxes. But the value, as you just pointed out, was now we could just take it off the ship and put it on a rail car. And like you said, a double stacked rail car means even more goods can get into the inside of the U.S. and go to intermodal hubs or onto a truck even. What I don't want my listeners to confuse here, and I think that most of them probably have this straight, is that the trucks that you see on the road that don't look like they come apart, right? Just the regular trucks, those are 53 foot for the most part. But the ones that we're talking about, the boxes that we're talking about here, are actually literally, they look like cargo container boxes. You'll note them when you see them, and they're sitting on a chassis, which has been a part of conversation for quite a while, chassis availability. But that's what it is. The chassis is the wheels. So it's a base with wheels, and then the box just sits right on top. such a simple concept, but such an important pivotal moment. And it was created by Malcolm McLean, who was a trucker. He was just trying to figure out an easier, faster way of doing this. It's one of those, you're sitting there looking there and you're like, there's got to be an easier way of doing this.
It's amazing, but it's also complex. The terminals are the hub of where and how we deliver intermodal cargo. We interface with the ocean shipping companies. They're our customers. Sometimes they have cargo that's going to go on a railroad. Sometimes it goes on our own rail system of delivery. We spend an immense amount of money on billions of dollars on infrastructure for railroads at our terminals on dock rail, and we manage the rail operations, and then we give them in turn to the intermodal rail companies. So railroad policy, trucking policy, they all impact our industry because we handle, as you say, chassis and the availability of chassis. And if they don't have wheels, they don't usually come into our terminal. And if they don't come into our terminal, we're going to get congestion. So it's a intricate ballet, and hopefully one of the ballerinas is not thrown to the side and missed in a catch because that will dilute the ballet. And so it is incredibly complex, but all of these industries affect terminal operations. So if it's slow on the rail side, that 60% of the cargo coming in from LA Long Beach is slowed down. And so they may say, well, the terminal's really moving slow. And it's moving slow because beneath the terminal, there are problems, or coming into the terminal, there are problems. So we have to work very closely with the industries that we work at. We're connected together. We're almost the only a part of the transportation chain that is a hub that connects to everybody. Everyone might have interface with one or the other, but we connect to everyone, and that's why I really believe that our industry, terminal industry, is critically important. And so we're looking at policies, railroad policies, this merger, Union Pacific CSX merger, and which could create the first transcontinental railroad that could do intermodal cargo both sides. It's something that we're going to look at very closely because it impacts all of the port ranges and the terminals that serve those ports in the United States.
And I love that analogy. The ballet dance, right? It is a dance, and it's not just a dance among the ports and terminals. It's a dance throughout the entire, everything that touches it, which that's the motor carriers, that's the truckers, right? That's the drayage providers, that's the rail, that's the everybody who's in and around the port has a piece of that dance. Commissioner Dyes often called it also an ecosystem, right? It's you always say supply chain. The world always says supply chain links or supply chain, but it really is supply chain ecosystem or supply chain dance. I think that I like that even better. But so there are so many components to it. There are so many opportunities for jumping in and trying to find areas that we can improve. You mentioned rail being one that you're watching and figuring out how that can best kind of help the free flow of goods, right? Because it's all about really the fluidity of movement. Because as you said, when things get gummed up, it doesn't just stop one little piece. It can throw off the whole dance. It can throw off the whole ecosystem. And sometimes we saw that, whether it was chassis unavailability, whether it was empty return or non-return, it's all working together. And if one little piece gets a little too overworked or it's not quite available for the rest of the system to keep moving, that becomes a problem for the entire system. So all of that said, what you experienced during your time at the FMC, you're coming into now with fresh eyes. What are some of your priorities that are during your first year here? You're almost through your first year, but what will you continue into year 2 and year 3 as your key tenants? I mean, is it infrastructure modernization? Is it smart regulations that support the productivity? Where are you going to be focusing a lot of your time to move NOWI forward?
Well, it's a little bit of everything, as it always is. We got to cover everything for our industry, and that's what we will do. But I think clearly the president's executive order on maritime industrial base redevelopment and the USTR actions on shipping and also on container crane equipment and containers. Those two actions are being considered to impose penalties as a result of Chinese market dominance. The president's executive order is a broader order that is very broad. It's probably the biggest maritime pronouncement in decades. But the commitment to rebuild our industrial base. 98% of all marine containers are built in China at subsidized government-controlled facilities. Well over 60% of the world's fleet is built in China with subsidized government-controlled facilities, and 96% of the ship-to-shore cranes that are used in moving cargo, the big cranes that we use, large yard equipment, less with a large yard equipment, but 96% of the ship-to-shore cranes are built in China. So that finding has created issues on how the government is going to respond to the trade domination, and there's going to be penalties that will be imposed. So we're watching very closely and working on issues to try to address what could occur if someone told a car manufacturer that a vital set of equipment that they use in the production of manufacturing cars, that 96% of that market share was going to be taken out of utilization. It would be a horrific event, and that's what we're facing here in the United States, potentially with penalties. And the penalties were justified legally through the USTR proceeding. So we're working with the administration to get support for waivers to allow existing equipment to come in, some transition. We just cannot move from a market that is so dominant and away from that market for vital equipment without assistance. So we've been working with the White House, with the administration, with Congress to try to develop some policies to mitigate some of these costs. So in a perfect world, we would get some time to address this, get our equipment in. Some of this stuff was ordered well before the administration even, and this is hundreds of millions of dollars of equipment. An order of container cranes might be $60 million coming in, and we have 25, 40 pieces of major equipment coming in every year that is incredibly efficient and productive in moving cargo. So we need to get support for some programs to help mitigate the challenge of addressing a new market situation. And I think my members are in general supportive of developing the maritime industrial base. We're part of the maritime network. We use many of the employees that steamship companies do, and we work with the intermodal industry as well. And so developing a better U.S. system of employees and companies that can supply our companies in the movement of cargo is in our best interest. Ultimately, it's really how do we get there, and you can't go from 0 to 90 and without some special technologies, and so that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think that's right. You had actually raised that alarm with one of your reports at the FMC, right? The China report on container building and chassis building. And so certainly that was an eye-opening, although probably confirming what we assumed. But the very high percentages of what is built in China, of the containers and the chassis and these very important pieces of equipment that are part of the overall chain. But I think that that's a really important note that you made, in that we need a runway, right? I mean, we need to make sure that there isn't going to be significant debilitating disruptions. For the most part, it seems people are on board. Yes, let's reshore that's maritime industrial base. Let's get it kind of back going to the U.S. But we need a runway because we can't just flip that switch, right? We're not ready to start making all those things tomorrow, but we can get there. But as you're saying, we're going to need to get there quickly. But what does that mean, right? What's the timeline for that? And I think that's where that's where we're still working all that out. And I'm happy that you're part of those conversations.
Well, it's a critical issue how we transition to this. I mean, we face as an industry challenges with tariffs in general. We're relatively agnostic about who comes into the port, so we want as much cargo to come in and enter the system and move through our system efficiently and expand. And it's a growth market. We're not, if you look at it, there's some dips and stuff, but we are industries that have largely historically been situated in areas where we're surrounded by population growth. If you think about it, every port was a port first, then there was a little town there, and then there was a bigger town, and then there was a municipality, and then there was an urban center, and then there was urban sprawl. And how do you continue to take volume growth and larger ships coming in on the other side and address that? How do you expand that? How do you get in efficient cargo moving systems to move cargo through your complex more rapidly to grow, to continue to grow business? So we're a growing industry. I have no doubt that we will continue to grow. Our question is, what can we do in our sort of confined footprint to address that going forward? The amount of new greenfield site ports in the United States can be counted on one hand. When I started working on Capitol Hill, I'm not even going to go back how far it was, but I did a hearing on the FMC commission, the commission authorization bill, and I think there were 6 million TEUs. I guess I'll have to tell you, it was 1990. And in 1990, there was 6 million TEUs in commerce. I think we're at about 38 million TEUs of cargo that are moved here. So that is over 600% increases in that time frame. So we're moving up, and we'll continue to move up. It's just, will we be able to do it? And we have pressures, for instance, on the West Coast, we have intense pressures to decarbonize, to reduce emissions, and we may not be able to operate the same way if we don't address those. So we have huge challenges on how we're going to address local and national and international requirements on health and welfare, and still accommodate the need to move enhanced cargo.
Yeah, I think that's right too. I mean, I think that one thing that happened during COVID is everybody saw the billions of dollars of profits that were happening in the industry, but that's not what is normal for this industry. This is an industry that really is, it has some pretty small margins. In 2016, we saw Hanjin go bankrupt. I mean, these were too large to fail, right? That I think that the perception of society waking up to the ocean shipping system was a little bit, it was great. One thing great that the industry, that the society kind of saw the value and importance of the ocean shipping side of things. But on the other hand, they might have gotten a little skewed view of it. And so while it's important to continue to push forward for all sorts of different, you were mentioning environmental standards or different kind of regulations that might be associated with the ports or terminals or ocean carriers, it's also, those are going to be costs that factor in, and any cost that happens onto the supply chain could be a cost that ends up in the consumer's pocket too. So as with everything, it's important to kind of balance it all out and make sure that, things continue to move freely and flow, because that is how we get 90% of everything. Perhaps if there's trade rebalances, who knows what we're going to see in the next 5, 10, 15 years. maybe that 90% will go down in number. But as of right now, we're relying on 90% of everything coming through ocean shipping and the ports and terminals. And so, kind of prioritizing the expediency and the movement while also balancing some of the other concerns generally.
I learned so much when I was a commissioner about that dependence on overseas shipping, and it would be a certain commodity that I never knew existed that was vitally important for clean drinking water. And I did get calls from the upper Midwest about potentially having to close down facilities because they wouldn't have certain types of chemicals that are additives to purify water. And I thought, wow, that's pretty important. I remember talking to the construction industry that builds large skyscrapers in New York. And they said, listen, every single time we build a building, it's a new contract. You don't build the same skyscraper any place. So we set up a new supply chain. There's probably 60 companies that we work with, and then those companies have 60 people that they work with. And they need to get each product in sequence installed in that building to get it built productively, efficiently. But the dependence of our nation, both on retail, where we unfortunately are importing much more than we manufacture, and on manufacture here in the United States relies on ocean shipping. And even food products, and it's just incredible, how much and how many products are used and incorporated into our existence. But I imagine that if you go through a room in your house, you would find out that so much of it had come from someplace else and then been incorporated through shipping. Aviation services for international shipping are very expensive, and you can only use them really for low, high value commodities that can be adapt to the cost of that, and so you're reliant on ocean shipping for pretty much the basic subsistence of our nation.
That's right. And one thing that I was really interested to learn for even meat imports. So even if we were to get up to 100% U.S. Texas rancher, of the meat world, the meat that we bring in and imports is necessary to make a hamburger, because the imports have a leaner fat number than the fatty cows that I guess we have here in the U.S. And so sometimes it's not just a one or the other, but it's a both. And so even if we were to trade balance, we're going to still need things coming into this country to help supplement or support our manufacturing, like you're saying.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, look at the fresh fruit markets, the vegetables markets. In wintertime, we're not growing anything. And so most of those products are coming from the Southern Hemisphere. And so it shifts. And so there's an immense amount of reefer cargo that comes from around the same with fisheries products. I spent a lot of time with Fisheries Institute and industries that rely on certain products that we commonly are accessible at restaurants and at grocery stores, but they might not be capable of being produced or resourced in the United States waters or Canadian waters. So every industry, and it might not be the product itself. It may be the processing or the packaging or I was talking to the wine and spirits folks, and they were having immense problems getting bottles and corks transported during the pandemic. And you can't transport wine without some sort of stoppage system, and so they lost opportunity and reduced sales. So it is critically important to our nation.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because during the pandemic, I was shopping at Trader Joe's, and they said, we're not going to have the salad dressing in for a while because they're stuck offshore on a barge off of LA. And I was like, It's not entirely accurate, but I love that you just told me that. It was just the cashier explaining to me how the supply chain worked and how they couldn't get in the bottles for the dressing. It was just a kind of a full circle. All right, society's getting it moment.
Yeah. No, I worked on Capitol Hill on issues related to oil spill liability for edible oils for a number of years. So I can tell you that there's a lot of salad dressing floating around out there on chips.
Well, so part of all of this discussion too is then the reliability, the data dissemination. This was an initiative that you had at the FMC, your Maritime Transportation Data Initiative, because there is fragmentation of data across the chain, right? It can be a little bit difficult to get that transparency, but that was something that you wanted to hit. What were some of the pain points of data dissemination under this Maritime Transportation Data Initiative? So what did it reveal, and how do you kind of plan to advance that work here at NAUI?
So, it's not the most integral issue that faces my industry, but we suffer for lack of good data. For instance, right now, there's a lot of blank sailings and ship services are being canceled. And we are not getting adequate information about these to try to help us adjust. Carriers were reluctant. There's all sorts of information that's out there. And so there's not a question of access to information. You can see where a ship is. What you're not getting is operational information about when it intends to be landed and how you could fit it into your system to forecast need and such. So at the FMC, I proposed that information be made transparent and that it be real-time information that included operational information. And that was for the terminals as well. And we have an obligation, for instance, to provide good information about when our gates are going to be open and closed and what our services are, restrictions. And so my industry, the terminal industry, does suffer for lack of good information, and it's ad hoc. There's some carriers that are better than others, but in this day and age, we should be able to transmit information. These are huge pieces of equipment. It's not like rocket science to see where they are. What needs to occur is that information needs to be provided to the public so they know when they're going to get there, what the plan is for. If you got onto an airplane and you didn't have any ETA, people would be upset because they're trying to plan connecting flights and make sure they're going to get there on time and monitoring it. But cargo does not vote and does not talk. And so I would say the FMC should take up those recommendations, look at them again, because they are going to cost us billions of dollars. And so my industry would like to receive better information. And even while the recommendations required us to be transparent on our operations, we're committed to do that in the interest of business. So it's just common sense, frankly, and it's not creating a whole new system. It's just there should be a mandate that they provide us estimated arrivals and certain standards of data that could be made publicly accessible. All this technology is reliant on data and data input. And if the data is not there, you can have the best technology in the world, but it doesn't matter because it doesn't have that element that you need to use to make quantifiable decisions. And so hopefully as time goes on, we'll recognize the value of doing something like that. It will help our industry ultimately if we can. I mean, I don't know how many places in the world where you can have a cancellation and find out that it was canceled 6 weeks before and not be told of that cancellation.
Well, and I think that's so right too. One of the other points that you made was that just speaking the same language, right? Having the data come in a very consistent package. And with your MTDI, one of the best practices that you pointed out was the Digital Container Shipping Association, their standards. And there's been actually a lot of advancement with DCSA adoption across the industry, but it's got to be more, right? It's got to be more of that visibility, more of that consistency. And I think that we're getting there certainly, but we all need to kind of speak the same language. It's the same way that credit cards can be accepted around the world because of SWIFT. I think DCSA will help us get there, at least for that back end side of things, for the speaking the same language side of things.
So they developed the standards. We incorporated into the MTDI recommendations. So everyone's agreed on pretty much the standards. It's not an issue of that. It's just not all of the information to impose the value proposition for the data has been implemented, and that's real-time information and operational changes.
Yeah, that's right. Well, let's change gears a little bit here. I want to make sure that we're still talking about labor and workforce. So obviously, like we said, ports are powered by people. How does now we engage on labor and workforce, safety today, training for tomorrow? How does that all work into everything that you do? It's a obviously integral piece.
Yeah, sure. I'm the president of a National Association of Waterfront Employers, representing the folks that we talked about earlier. We're also I'm the executive director of what's the National Maritime Safety Association. That's many of the same companies and their personnel that are engaged in operational issues related to safety and welfare of the workforce. We work continually with our longshoremen employees to make sure we have the safest working environment that we have. We work through the collective bargaining agreement to come to agreements on how to adopt new technology. That is probably going to be the challenge in the future. I hate even to bring up or talk about the issue of automation because I don't think anyone really feels comfortable with automation. But we need certainly to get more equipment that will allow us to maximize productivity and generate more growth at ports. And so we'll work with our longshoremen on that. And really, if you look during the pandemic, they were the people that were doing the work of delivering cargo, and we work with them and we manage them. And so safety is a critically important issue. I spend a fair amount of my time learning from my industry on what these issues are, and we have to work with our labor unions to make sure that's done the right way, and that we can continue to move forward to address growth, expansion, and make sure that we can serve the shipping public the way we need to. So it's a continual challenge, but I really believe that it could be the most important thing that we do to make sure that we can continue to grow and expand as an industry and do it in a safe, efficient way. And like I said, there's immense challenges. You can't build something else. No one's going to allow us in LA, where you have so many people, to build a new major complex there. So we really have to work to get maximize the use of the facilities that we have and grow it. And so that's why we're challenged with administration's trade policies on STS cranes. Those would be the cranes, the next generation cranes that will allow us to accommodate the trade growth, to maximize the use of our facilities. Frankly, we're going to need people to always work, and I anticipate that there will be growth at all of our terminals in employment. It's just, how do we get there? And so that's the challenge. So we're working on that. This is my members themselves, but we're supporting them on policies to make sure that that can happen.
And I think that that's great, and that leads me into kind of my next question here: is U.S. ports are facing global competition, and so talking about the ship-to-shore cranes, right? We're going to have to get the cargo off of the vessel onto the port, and the fastest we can do that, right? The better we can do that. But are there any other gaps, or now I'm sure is making the case for more investment in the ports and in the terminals and the urgent need for all of that. What are some of those arguments that you're making beyond just ship-to-shore, but just making it so that the ports and terminals are supported?
Yeah, we are concerned. I represent U.S. Marine Terminal Operations, so I work with my friends from the north and south on safety issues, but on competitive issues, I'm firmly on the side of U.S. based entities. We have suffered a little bit as a result of policies that impose financial burdens on us. For instance, penalties on Chinese ships as a result of the USTR determination. Is that going to erode trade in the northern tiers, both Massport and New York and Pacific Northwest Seaport Alliance, Seattle, Tacoma, and also probably Oakland and LA, and it could. And so we've suggested that the same sort of penalties be imposed on cargo that's being transshipped through Mexican or Canadian ports. And so we believe that any penalties that our government is imposing on our industry that impact them should be imposed on something going north or south to avoid that very fact. The Canadians have essentially 4 ports, 2 on the east and 2 on the west. Maybe they'll get a little bit more. We in the United States, we have 20, 30 major ports that serve all through the United States. So Canadian policy is focused on their growth of those port complexes in order to get cargo into the United States. And our government has imposed, for various reasons, taxes like the harbor maintenance tax that force shippers to pay more to get dredge funds, and also potentially penalties as a result of USTR action. So we're hopeful that there could be some equalization. I think we'd be comfortable on a apples to apples competition to the north and south, but it's not that way right now. And so we need to do something about that.
And that's so interesting. I hadn't actually heard that, the concern about going to Canadian or Mexican ports, but I often hear that about harbor maintenance tax, right? And the loophole was closed on that. But you're right, USTR Section 301 is assessing against China-built or operated vessels. But yeah, if you're 50 miles away or, maybe 100 and 200 miles away, and you could just go to a different port just up the way instead. Interesting. Yeah, that is a loophole that seems like it should be closed.
We've asked for it. There's actually some recognition in the president's executive order on this. So we're going to work to ensure that there's just equality in the assessments. We shouldn't be giving someone an opportunity to serve our nation's supply through ports in their nation because of our federal policies. And so we're hopeful that we can get some adjustments on that. And I hate to, we have a really good relationship with our Canadian counterparts, less experience with Mexico, but it certainly hurts us, those actions that our government's taking in the competition that exists. So we want just fair competition on the assessment of cargoes.
Yeah, and it seems like this might have been an inadvertent, shooting us in the foot kind of thing, where we didn't mean to be cargo diversion, right? We didn't mean to be creating a cargo diversion opportunity for these vessels to go elsewhere. It was trying to impact behavior for the dominance of China in the maritime vessel shipbuilding space. But yeah, it's important for the industry to stay engaged and to notice these loopholes that need closing.
Yeah, no. If these are governmental actions, I mean, on the other hand, the Canadian government spent a lot of money providing infrastructure funding for a much smaller pool of port complexes in order to serve our markets, because we're such big markets. So I think in 2005 or 2006, only about 5% of the intermodal cargo was going through Canadian ports. At the last time I looked, I think close to 60. This is into Chicago, from West Coast to into Chicago, was 5 or 6 points, percentage points, and now that's over 60%.
Well, we're almost done. I've really enjoyed the conversation here today, but I'm sure we'll have you back before this. But if we had you back, when we have you back in 5 years, what do you want us to be celebrating, the achievements that NAUI is looking for in the next 5 years? What are we going to be talking about in 5 years, do you think? A wild question, because who knows, right? But
sure, no. I mean, I think we would like to get some adjustment to whatever the trade policy is to make sure we can continue to handle trade moving forward. We need to come up with policy adjustments on how, this administration right now is not inclined to push environmental, decarbonization, for instance. But we still face pressures with other entities, international pressures, or state or municipal or local pressures. So how our industry addresses that with costs so high in these areas of constrained growth, to adapt, we need to come up with a plan to address what the decision is on future environmental health and safety issues that we have to address. I would like to have dedicated funding for infrastructure at our terminals. We're the node. We're actually the hub of international trade, and if you don't keep the hub lubed and operating smoothly, everything else is going to fall apart. So I would hope that we could attract a way of maintaining some level of dedication to commitments of infrastructure, and that is water, that's shoreside, and that's even some of the equipment and the mandates that we're facing. And I think greater coordination with government, state agencies, and the private sector. How do we reach out and make sure our customers are getting the best services, and we're not impeding their operations by virtue of our operations? So those would be the targets, and I'd say greater recognition for our importance as an industry, and acknowledgement of the services that are provided generally for the shipping industry. Maritime shipping industry. So those are the broad brush directions that we're going to be aimed at. But essentially, I want to make a better environment condition policy to help our industries move forward. We have a new logo on maritime port operations. Port and Terminal Operations 2040, a roadmap to the future. And so how do we get to where we're going to need to be by 2040? And so that's what we're targeting. Long range and short range will go as issue comes up to address the concerns of the industry.
That's great. Well, in 15 years, we may have U.S. carriers as part of the competitive market in the ocean carriers world. Who knows where we'll be in 15 years? Well, before we go, you have a big conference coming up next week. What can attendees expect? Why is this such an important conference right now, gathering the industry, having these conversations?
So one of the things I'm trying to do with my association is increase our presence with all of the shipping communities. So intermodal trucking, railroads, BCOs, shippers, NVOCCs. We've got a pretty good relationship with the carriers because many of our officials that work in our industry are from steamship lines, and they work there, and we have contracts with them. But we need to do a better job. And so our annual conference is in Huntington Beach. In California. I'm excited. We're going to talk about lots of interesting issues, warm weather, and get together to see how we can work on supporting the policies that we need. And so going forward, I do think it's incumbent on our industry to increasingly take a leadership role and to work with those in the shipping industry that we should work with all the time. And so I can tell you when I was at the FMC, I heard more about trucking issues than I heard in some cases about shipping issues and terminal issues. And they're vital to the movement of cargo through our terminals. So we have to make sure our own operations work the same way, and vice versa. I remember they all came to the terminals. So you guys have to be open 24 hours, 7 days a week. And we told them, no one, we've tried that before. We open our terminals on Sunday and no one shows up. Truckers don't have any more time left to service that. And the warehouses are not open. So you could pick up cargo from my terminal and have a truck driver go out and wait for 2 days before the warehouse opens up, or the transload facility to take the 40-foot container and put it in the 53-foot container. So we're dependent on all of those elements: ocean carriers, intermodal rail, trucking, the BCOs themselves. And so I'd like to make sure that our companies are actively engaged in all aspects of logistics going forward, and we're the connective body that hosts them all.
Well, that's great. Well, enjoy, have fun, enjoy the warm weather. Thank you so much for joining us today. For listeners who want to follow along, where should they go? Where can they find Nowie? More information?
www.nowie.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Carl. Great to have you.
Okay, Lauren, it's great to see you again, and I will see you next time.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, as always, there's a lot going on in the world of shipping. That's why I bring you the experts, voices like Carl Bentzel, who's worked inside government and now lead on the industry side. And sometimes it's just me with a microphone, making sure you have the plain language breakdown you need to keep up with this fast-moving world. If you like this episode, be sure to follow, subscribe, and leave a review. Want to go deeper on these topics or bring this kind of insight to your team? Visit themaritimprofessor.com to explore corporate trainings, tailored briefings, and on-demand webinars, all designed to make complex maritime regulations practical and easy to understand. And if your organization needs help navigating the legal or strategic side of ocean shipping, head over to Squall Strategies. That's where I provide consulting services, regulatory guidance, legal and policy support for clients across the global supply chain. Well, as always, this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered legal advice. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. Until next time, I'm Lauren Began, the Maritime Professor, and you've just listened to By Land and By Sea. See you next time.